John Napier Wyndham Turner, usually known simply as John Turner, was born in June 1929 and at 89 years is the oldest surviving Canadian Prime Minister today. He served briefly as the 17th Prime Minister of Canada for about 2.5 months from June the 30th until September the 17th, 1984. He succeeded Pierre Trudeau after the latter's last retirement as Prime Minister and then was succeeded by Brian Mulroney following the Liberals' disastrous defeat in the September the 4th, 1984 federal election. His greatest accomplishments as a politician occurred before his brief prime ministership. Most notably as Justice Minister, he was able to persuade the House of Commons to approve the War Measures Act. It's an invocation, and probably also as Consumer and Corporate Affairs. He had some early successes as Finance Minister, but his refusal to implement the price and wage and price controls and his growing disagreements with Trudeau's two interventionist economic policies led to his resignation in September 1975. He then served for 8.5 years as a member of a law firm in Toronto, having given up his seat in the House of Commons in February 1976. Then in March 1984, after Trudeau's retirement announcement, he came back to public life, announcing his candidacy for the Liberal leadership, and he won the leadership on the second ballot with 54% of the vote on June the 16th, 1984. He promised to create jobs by restoring national confidence, but he was often short on specifics, and he, for example, spoke of make work programs rather than job creation programs. He only changed a few cabinet ministers on being appointed Canada's new Prime Minister, which was a mistake given his claim that he represented newness and change. He also appointed on Trudeau's behalf over 70 fellow Liberals, including over 10 Liberal members of the House of Commons, to well-paid and politically filled civil service or patronage positions, for which action he was strongly condemned by the two opposition leaders, Progressive Conservative Brian Mulroney and New Democrat Ed Broadbent. He also then claimed that he had had no option but to do that, otherwise he might not have been granted the opportunity of forming a new federal cabinet, which would have had serious consequences for the Canadian people. And in a verbal broadside, Brian Mulroney condemned this explanation as an avowal of failure and an admission of non-leadership. In the English language televised debate in the last week of July 1984, which was largely responsible for the magnitude of Liberal defeat. They might still have lost the election, but by a clearly smaller margin had Trudeau not wilted, figuratively speaking, during those 4 minutes of the 2-hour debate. Turner then became the opposition leader. He improved his speaking style. He became more forceful and aggressive in opposition, and he did keep Mulroney for defensive much of the time in both the French and English language debates in the last week of October 1988. However, this only managed to rescue, to quote a Canadian political scientist, James John Guy, in his introductory textbook on political science, it only helped to rescue his honor as a leader, because there had been rumors during the election campaign, especially during its first half from September to October 1988, that some backroom Liberal strategists were considering replacing Turner with the much more popular Jean Chrétien of Quebec, who had retired voluntarily from the House of Commons in 1986, and who was on much better terms with the retired Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. With about 32% of the popular vote, the Liberals doubled their representation to 83 seats, but were still twice behind the Progressive Conservatives, who took 43% of the popular vote and 169 seats. He announced his resignation as Liberal leader on February the 7th, 1990, and left, and his successor, Jean Chrétien, was elected in late June 1990. He then only sporadically attended the House of Commons in sessions before officially leaving that chamber in the 1993 federal parliamentary elections. He was so far the last foreign-born Prime Minister of Canada, born in Richmond, Surrey, England, United Kingdom. He was a corporate lawyer by his original education and work experience. And he then returned to private practice as a lawyer at Miller Thompson LLP, eventually also heading the partnership's scholarship program. In 1994, he was made a Companion of the Order of Canada. In late 2004, he headed the delegation of Canadian election monitors to the Ukraine. He has voiced his support for the campaign for the establishment of a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, an organization which campaigns for democratic reformation of the United Nations and the creation of a more accountable international political system. In 2017, he was awarded the Gold Medal of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. Owing to his very brief prime ministership, he didn't introduce any laws, and accordingly he has been ranked near the bottom of the Canadian prime ministers. Number 18 out of the first 20 prime ministers through Jean Chrétien by a survey of Canadian historians in 1999. It was used in the book Prime Ministers Ranking Canada's Leaders by J.L. Granatstein and Norman Hilmer.